Took long enough, didn't it? Washington moves up to 4 in the AP poll.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another episode of Locked On Huskies. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. We write for Inside the Huskies of Fan Nation Sports Illustrated. You can check out all our written work over there, si.com/college/Washington. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. All right, Lars. It finally happened. Washington finally jumps Florida State in the AP poll. They move up to number 4 after taking down the. I know we kind of jump back and forth with the rankings that we use, but because we're talking AP today, the 10th ranked Oregon State Beavers. Just instant reaction. How did this make you feel when you saw this?
Hell has frozen over, ladies and gentlemen. People have finally dropped the act just a little bit. And I mean, I think it's fair, right? And going back to our conversation last night after the game against Oregon State, where could they be 3rd? Sure. Could they be 4th? They deserve to be 4th, right? Could they be 3rd? That's the discussion that really should be having to be had here is Washington 3rd or are they 4th? And because this week, now you have Michigan and Ohio State playing each other, you can move up to 3rd rather easily, right? Because you think one of those two is going to be 1 and 2. Washington moves up to 3. And then maybe let's say Michigan loses the game, they move to 4, or maybe Florida State moves up. And then you have,
I think if Florida State wins, they move back to 4.
One would hope, right? But then again, the only thing that would be in consideration would be is Jordan Travis and, oh man, the Florida State backup has actually a uniquely cool last name. I'm forgetting his name off the top of my head, but I think you know, like it's like
I know who you're talking about. Yes,
like a Roadmeyer or something like that. I forgot I know I'm butchering that name, but I mean, I think that at the end of the day, Washington is without question one of the top 4 teams in the country. Are they 1, 2, 3, or 4, right? Because right now they're still undefeated, and if you beat Wazoo on Friday or Wazoo on Saturday, get into the Pac-12 championship game, you're certainly likely 4th, maybe 3rd, depending on how the Michigan-Ohio State game goes. And then with a win against Oregon, maybe you move up to 2 or 1, right? Depending on how the SEC championship goes. Let's say a 1-loss Alabama somehow gets in, plays Georgia, and beats Georgia, right?
Right.
Washington would move up to number 1 at that point, maybe number 2, depending on where Michigan and Ohio State stand. But you're never going to be back to 4th or 5th, right? I think if you win out, you're no matter what going to be one of the top 2. Yeah, but that's kind of what's frustrating is obviously you're going to beat Washington State, but then the question becomes, okay, well, if you beat Oregon, well, I guess if you lose Oregon, you're out. It doesn't matter because then the Pac-12 champ would be Oregon with a 1 loss and Washington would have the 1 loss, and then it kind of becomes, okay, well, now neither Pac-12 school gets in because both have 1 loss.
Right.
But, yeah, go ahead.
Tate Roadmaker, by the way, is his name.
Roadmaker. Okay, that was close. Mayor.
Fantastic name. But no, I like everything that you're saying there because I agree. I think that it feels like 3 might. I know it's something we've kind of gone back and forth on. I feel like 3 might be the ceiling just with the fact that it took this long to get the Huskies all the way to 4. It's tough, but I do think that the Huskies, assuming they beat Washington State, would jump all the way up to 3. And I think that Florida State moves back to 4. And like I said on our live show after the Oregon State game, I think that Michigan, Ohio State, whoever loses that game ends up at 5. And that they just kind of usurp Oregon. And that still sets up a really fun matchup between Washington and Oregon. Well, we would see what happens with that. Of course, that is assuming that Oregon State beats or Oregon beats Oregon State, excuse me, because there's still the Arizona State game. And, in that case, depending on what happens. But yeah, there are a whole lot of moving parts here, and it feels like just this is what we've said all year, where it's frustrating. It doesn't matter in the long run, but it also matters because we need to talk about it, and that's all we can see in front of us. So it's just a matter of all right, just win and control your destiny, and you'll find a way in.
Man, wouldn't it be magical if Arizona beats Arizona State and Oregon State beats Oregon and we get Jed Fish in the Pac-12 championship game? I mean, I know everyone's going to say it's an easier matchup, but at the same point, people have made this good point. If it's a 12-team playoff, Arizona would likely get in,
right,
as one of the final at-larges. And I'm not sure you want to face Arizona with the momentum and steam that they have, and you only beat them by 7 on the road going down to Vegas. It's a neutral site. That might be only like a 5-6 point spread, maybe.
It's going to be really close no matter what it is.
Right.
But on top of that, the best thing about that is because I feel like every time I send out a tweet now where it's praising Washington for this, praising Washington for that, I see a couple bookmarks on there that definitely aren't coming from Husky fans. So I feel like not only with that scenario, which would be really fun, no doubt. And this isn't knocking Oregon when we say this, because playing Oregon again would also be a fantastic matchup. But if somehow Oregon State beats Oregon, Arizona beats Arizona State, that would just destroy all these hypothetical arguments that we've seen from Oregon fans on Twitter, or it would just make them stronger. I don't know if I want to see either of those personally, because it's just this never ending, well, if this happened or if this, and I'm tired of it.
Right. Well, I mean, that's again the whole point of the Pac-12 this year has been it's such a better year in the conference that it doesn't really matter who you're facing in that championship game. It's going to be a tough stand, right? Even if you were to play Utah, or even if you were to play, I mean, I think the only ones that wouldn't put up much of a fight is USC at this point, right? So I think everybody else in the conference really seems like they would put up a good fight. Right. And so, it's not a matter of Washington wants to duck Oregon to face Arizona or Arizona to face Oregon. It's like, both of those teams would end up being really good matchups and not guaranteed wins, right? And again,
right,
you would still think Washington should win that game given how the season is gone, but certainly not. You wouldn't blow them out, right? This wouldn't be a 10, 17, 21 point victory.
No. And I actually, on that note, I saw a comment that we had on one of our videos where it said that this Washington team gives off Florida State vibes from the year that they lost to Oregon in the Rose Bowl and got blown out, that there's a massive blowout coming their way. And I really wanted to address that. And I feel like this is the time to do it because this Washington team is so much better coached. Like the coaching staff is phenomenal. And like, just whenever you just look at, I put out a tweet last night that there are flaws that you can see with this Washington team. There are. Like, they're not perfect, but the one thing you can never doubt is their intensity and heart down the stretch. That whatever mistakes that they made earlier on in the game, it seems like they are always mitigated in the fourth quarter, and they always find a way to overcome that and keep going. And for that reason, when it comes down to crunch time, like not even just in the fourth quarter, whenever that might be, whenever a play needs to be made, this Washington team makes that play. They aren't. It's past the point of luck at this rate. Yeah, you can say, oh, there was a call here or a call there, and sure, those calls help. But on the other side of that, because I also want to make sure that we negated that argument, Washington is the most penalized team in the country.
Yeah. I've seen a couple of those tweets where like, oh, Washington's gotten every call. It's like, well, yeah, you're right. They have gotten every call against them is my point. Like every call, and actually, we can make the case that they haven't gotten every call because look how much Brilliant Trice has been held this season. There's a number of players that you can kind of go to Roma Junze, the most held receiver in the country, right? Like there's so many other calls that have not gone Washington's way to where there's enough element of, hey, Washington still got some good juju out there that, they haven't cashed in on yet, right? That margin is very, very slow. You're running out of juju that you haven't cashed in yet, but you still got enough in the reserve tank to say, hey, Rome hasn't always gotten those calls. Maybe he gets one when it's not necessarily a given and, got to get a benefit of the doubt call sort of thing.
Right.
There's still a couple of those in the chamber.
Hey, Lars, I've got some news for you. We have a new sponsor here on Locked On Huskies today. And this is a really cool sponsor. I'm very excited to talk about our new friends over at listening.com. College students, listen up. There's this incredible app called listening.com, which can take any academic paper, PDF, or any kind of class material and turn it into an audiobook. And personally, I think that would be just the most helpful thing in the world. It can read math equations, technical words, and complicated documents. It knows to skip all the citations, footnotes, and references, and lets you jump straight to the chapter or section you want to listen to. It even has a one-click note-taking button where it automatically puts the last 10 seconds into a notepad, so you don't have to type notes while you listen either. And the just best of all, if you use the link If you go to the link listening.com/lockedon, you'll be able to get your first 3 weeks for free. So go ahead and give it a try. Usually it's 2 weeks free, but with Locked On, just for being a Locked On listener, for being an everydayer, we appreciate you. You get an extra free week just for that when you go to listening.com/lockedon. That was fun. Good new spots in there. Love to see that on this here Locked On Huskies episode. Also, quick news. Want to get to this now. We passed 1,000 subscribers on YouTube officially. We want to say thank you so much to everybody for doing that. That is so awesome. We're so excited about that. We truly appreciate all the everydayers out there for helping us reach that point. Can't wait to get to the next 1,000. Seriously, it means the world to us. Thank you so much. And as we just move right along here, Oregon State, we need to talk a little bit more about this win, Lars, because we had a lot of fun on our live show, just kind of reacting, talking a lot about everything that went on, but there are still more things to talk about. Is there anything you still want to just make sure gets out into the ether about this win?
I mean, I think it's one of those where I saw a few people tweeting at me after the game, well, hey, let's rewrite, let's change the narrative. They didn't survive. They won a tough, close game. Well, you can't really have it both ways, right? Where yes, the positive side is you never trailed Oregon State, right? You never were down in the game like you were against USC. That being said, I don't necessarily think that was the most convincing win. However, at certain points in the season and in the month of November, it's not always going to look convincing. I mean, as we said it against on the show last night, Michigan didn't look that convincing. It's Maryland on the road. There's a number of schools that you're not going to blow out Chattanooga like you would Oregon State, right? It's Alabama wouldn't blow out Oregon State. So there's no way that you would think Washington would either. So I think they've done enough that there's nothing. Weather. Right. And I think that's kind of more the caveat that I wanted to touch on is that it's not a matter of, hey, Washington maybe didn't do. I mean, yeah, Penix has missed 9 straight throws, but if there's no rain, he makes at least 4 or 5 of those, right? He still might miss on a couple, but there's certainly a lot more in the tank for Penix. But again, much like the Arizona State game, that's a huge win for him in the rain, in the elements, to say, hey, you know what? Even though I might not be at my best, I can still deliver the pass when it matters. Then go back to that 3rd and 3 at the end of the game to seal the win. You have a completely unbalanced offense, right? Like 3 or 4 receivers out to the right side, Rome Jr. one-on-one, and I don't even think Penix looked to the right. I think he's like, look, Rome, get
one read progression.
Get that 1 degree of separation, and I'm not missing on this one. And that, because again, as I said after last night, that's a big throw, because if Penix misses that one, the clock stops. Oregon State likely gets the ball back unless you really want to go for broke and go for it on 4th down. But then even more so to that point, if you don't get it then Oregon State really only has to go, 20, 30 yards to get a field goal and win the game. So that was a big-time throw. It wasn't necessarily a Heisman moment because it's like, well, especially the throw against USC, the throw against Oregon, both of those plays were better than that one. But what's the caveat of 2 out of 3 of those plays? They involved Rome Jr. So I think that connection, and that's why, we said yes. He's a great receiving core. Penix is great, but Rome is on a different level. Penix is on a different level. That connection is on a different level than any of the other receivers in the room. And when he needs it most, and that's almost what's crazy. I mean, I've said this on the show. How teams leave Rome Jr. in one-on-one coverage, even in an unbalanced. I'm honestly more surprised teams don't double and triple Rome and just say, you know what? Make J-Mac catch it. Make Polk catch it. Make Culp catch it. Make somebody else other than Rome catch it, right? And we've seen what happens when Penix is forced to go through his reads at times. You can likely get more pressure, but Oregon State didn't get a sack last night. So everything worked out perfectly. I think Jonathan Smith, maybe he should take a look at his own coaching, as Scott Huff said earlier in the week as I wrote Inside the Huskies. Hey, I question some of their decision-making. It's like, well, in tongue-in-cheek, but it's also kind of true because, again, for a 2nd consecutive year, Washington went down to Oregon and didn't give up a sack to either Oregon or Oregon State.
Right. And that alone is huge. Michael Penix made a huge point to shout out his offensive line after the game. And that's the thing, right? Where not 2 of the 3 leading sack getters in the Pac-12 have not touched Michael Penix. Talk about Jonah Ellis and the name is escaping me now from the Oregon State defender who's just absolutely fantastic, and that's 100% on me for that too. But the two of the three leading sack getters in the Pac-12 have not touched Michael Penix over the past couple of weeks, and that's just absolutely massive. And just like I want to stick on the offensive side here for a second, because it did kind of feel like Jalen McMillan was going to be more just a bigger part of the game plan than he was in this game. And then the weather just kind of deterred that a little bit because, for safety reasons for the most part. And then he showed a little bit of rust. It's not easy to catch the ball in the rain. But that's something where I think that it still was a good sign to see him out there, and that against Washington State this coming week, we're going to see a lot more out of him, which is going to be really big. And then, of course, the caveat of let's see what happens with Giles Jackson, because if he plays, he officially burns his red shirt. Just something to keep an eye on there too.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say, don't be surprised if he burns his red shirt on that. Andrew Chatfield Jr. is the name you were looking for, I believe.
Andrew Chatfield, yeah, he's tremendous too. That's 100% on me for getting his for not remembering that. But defensively, two guys we want to talk about. Sorry, the first one, Braylon Trice. Braylon Trice had a phenomenal game. We spent my Twitter feed is basically all just Jabbar Muhammad praise because I love good corner play, and Jabbar Muhammad just looked absolutely unbelievable last night, and that was so great to see. And PFF credited him with a 0 passer rating when he was thrown at last night. 0 catches on 6 targets, just absolutely unbelievable. 4 PBUs, 2 picks. Jabbar Muhammad just had the game of his life, but Braylon Trice was also unbelievable. 2.5 TFLs, a sack. Should have had a second one. Let DJ Uyunglele kind of slip through his hands, but he was just getting pressure all night long. He was great, and this is what we kind of been waiting for. Where we talked about, Braylon Trice is getting pressure. Braylon Trice is, he's just not finishing off. He had the 1 sack last night, but just as much as his impact was felt in the pass game, you could see him just defending the run all night long and doing just a spectacular job.
Yeah, I can't believe. Well, first of all, let me go back to that point. It wasn't just Braylon that had a chance to get that sack. That was 3 different. I believe it was Zion, Braylon, and Javon Parker. All each had a chance to get DJ down. I think on that same play, right? I think that's the one you're talking about. Where I think on the call they said that the 2 UNO players kind of tackled each other. It's like, well, no. They were trying to sandwich DJ in the middle, and both of them basically just missed by an inch or 2. And DJ apparently is a magician in this off time and, snuck out of that pocket somehow. But to your point about Jabbar, this is kind of where when people say, well, how is Washington vulnerable, right? How do they still lose a game, right? And likely to Oregon or in a potential CIP matchup. Jabbar Muhammad cleared about highest rated corner in coverage against Oregon State. Who do you think had the second highest coverage grade for Washington on defense? This is all defense. So this is not the secondary.
I got that hint because I was gonna go with Carson Bruner.
You're correct. Yeah, you're correct. And
this is why we do this.
You want to double down and take a third? Who's number 3 on that list?
Yes. I'm going to go with Raylan Goforth.
Close. Right position, Drew Fowler.
I knew he was a linebacker.
So right, but that's what's crazy is you're just looking at this and yeah, it's amazing that's a problem moving forward, but beside the point, right? Because I think Jabbar has proven he's able to take enough guys away to where their second and third options aren't as good, even against Oregon, right? I mean, Oregon got their yardage, but who still won that game?
Right, Washington did.
And who didn't give up a game-winning 16-yard touchdown?
Wonder who.
Couldn't tell you.
Beats me. Lars, we've got some big news to discuss on the other side of the break here on Locked On Huskies, because the Apple Cup is going to continue through 2028. And I know we talked about it a lot earlier, but we have a lot more thoughts to share. But first, it's time to shout out our good friends over at FanDuel. And speaking of the Apple Cup, Washington comes in at 2 touchdown favorites. Am I correct there?
Yeah, 15.5.
15.5. That's right. because you can score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. You've been thinking about joining FanDuel. There's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and so much more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel is an official partner of the NFL.
16.5.
Ooh, 16.5. Still moving.
Yeah, it's going up. So is the over-under. The over-under was 66.5. Now it's 67.5.
I'd slam that over.
Yeah.
Moving right along here, Apple Cup. Lars, as a Wazoo alum, I'm gonna just hand it off to you. Just I just want your thoughts on the continuation of this game through 2028. I'll just give the just the overview for everybody. 2024 will be played at Lumen Field here in Seattle, and then 2025 will be played in Pullman. 2026 in Seattle, and alternating home and home from then on. I have a feeling that they'll reach a longer agreement than this too, where it'll end up continuing past 2028. This is just kind of feels tentative at this point, and this is just really good to see.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's a little more than tentative because it's in writing, but
I just mean like moving
temporary,
forward.
Right. Yeah. But I think it's a good building block, right? To say, hey, yes, we're not just doing the one-off in Lumen. We're going to actually make this a home and home, double home and home sort of thing, because I think at the end of the day, the Lumen is a good one-off, right? I think it's kind of good to get everybody in the same building for one new year, especially next year when Wazoo is going to be transitioning. There's still going to be a Power 2 conference. I'm just proud of that. 2. I mean, I don't know if you see that story, that the NCAA cleared the way for Wazoo and Oregon State to compete as a Power Conference next year in their 2-year window.
I did not see that.
So yeah, that's the thing. John Wilner, I believe, had that piece, but I'd been hearing that was going to be the case where there's a rule somewhere in there where once you're a Power 5 school, you have a 2-year transition period back down. So as long as you're playing what is somewhat an FBS schedule, which they will be next year with the Mountain West, and then you throw in the Apple Cup with Washington, et cetera, that's a Power 5 schedule. It's an FBS schedule, or it's an FBS schedule, or you're playing G5s, but it's still FBS. So that's how the door is open for Washington State and Oregon State to stay at the Power 5 level. And no, they're not going to be playing each other every other week, as some memes have insinuated on Twitter. But I do think it's good because
funny.
No, I mean, I would personally love it. And honestly, you know what? I'm going to try and say this with a straight face. You can't tell me that certain games between Oregon State and Washington State wouldn't be better than certain SEC matchups. And
I'm
certainly
not going to disagree with you there.
And certainly better than their mid to late November stat padding games this past weekend. So with that being said, and that includes Florida State too, despite the unfortunate situation with Jordan Travis. All that said, this is a perfect kind of happy medium for the two programs to continue through 28, as you mentioned, with the likelihood it will guarantee further, but you don't want to go 10 years out. You don't want to go 20. You don't want to do that right now. You just needed to get the Lumen set up and then find out a way to make it work for both schools to have a home and home. Because as we said, it's kind of hard to have an annual, like if you did like the Red River Shootout in Dallas, right, at AT&T Stadium, well, that's going to favor Texas more than Oklahoma, even though they're right there somewhat close. It's more so in Texas's backyard because it's in their home state more so than it is Oklahoma, right? So there's plenty of reasons to think, okay, well, Lumen is a good one-off, but we need to have that annual back and forth at home and, at Martin Stadium, at Husky Stadium, because otherwise it's like, well, there's no true reason to play that game, right? Because if you're Washington, you're giving up Husky Stadium and saying, okay, I guess we'll go try and fill an NFL stadium and give Wazoo fans 60-40 on the ticket. It's like that doesn't make sense year in and year out, but it allows both schools to get a home game 2 years out of the 4 years. And that's a happy medium compromise, I think.
No, I agree. And then just kind of on top of that, with it being just this transition year for Washington into the Big Ten, it just to add on to that, it kind of mitigates the money, right? Where both schools have to lose like a true home game that way. And that's one of the big things with Lumen. Like it's in UW's backyard. There has to be a way to make it a little bit more fair for the Wazoo side. But I really think that I want to look at just kind of the overarching theme of this. And this is a really good sign for just everything going forward, because one of the things that athletic director Troy Dannon talked about in his introductory press conference was that Washington needs to find a way to have 7 home games per year. And they were still able to do that this year, despite playing a Power 5 opponent on the road. And I'm feeling that the Pac-12 will find a way to stay together. It'll probably end up being more of a G5 kind of thing with, Fresno State, San Diego State, just those kinds of schools kind of moving over with everything that's going on with the Mountain West too. But I think that it's going to end up being really beneficial to both programs down the line, where you're not going to take a huge hit money-wise. You're going to find a way to have those extra home games. And the best part about this is because people, like the biggest thing that I feel like both you and I have seen throughout all this is, oh, well, what about the tradition of this? What about the tradition of that? Really the two biggest traditions, when you look at it from the standpoint of the team we cover, which is the University of Washington, the two biggest traditions throughout all this is playing Oregon and playing Washington State. Both of those things stay intact throughout all this. Yeah, it's great to take trips to the Bay Area or to Arizona, despite all the insanity that happens down there. Boulder is gorgeous. People love going to Utah too. But the two biggest traditions throughout all this, Oregon, Washington State, stay intact. And I think that is great for just the traditionalists in terms of college football.
You didn't have to lie to the people and say that we enjoy going down to the Bay Area. It's nice, don't get me wrong, but if I don't have to go to Cal and Stanford, I'm not crying. I'm not losing sleep over that trip. I will say, as you said, Southern California, sure. I don't mind going to Los Angeles.
I omitted that for a reason. Not only as somebody who was born and raised in Los Angeles, but also I wanted to shout out the Bay Area, because there are a few things that I love more in this world than a Ghirardelli Sunday from just the factory in San Francisco. Oh man, that just I got a sweet tooth, and it's incurable.
See, I'm different. Same for the Bay Area, but for the Bubblegum Shrimp Company. That's where I live. I mean, I live and die. But however, the reason why I'm able to give up the Bubblegum Shrimp Company is I found a new seafood place in Santa Monica, which is fantastic. So it kind of replaced that. Yeah, and if I'm going to cover a team in California, give me USC, UCLA over Cal Stanford every day and twice on Sunday.
And we're still getting that too, which is a big plus.
Exactly.
But it's kind of sticking with food, but moving away from food, because I know we could talk about that all day. Apple Cup. I know this is, I feel like this is a really good time to announce it, obviously, with, the Apple Cup being this week. It's not really time to look ahead to this game, but do you think that this is something where, like, I kind of want to talk about next year, right? Because it's something we've discussed before on a previous episode of the show, but with this game that's going to be played at Lumen Field, do you think that might be something that we see once every 5-10 years as kind of like a kickoff classic kind of thing? I know it feels a little weird to say with everything that goes on, but I feel like there's a way to make that work and kind of make it into a little bit more of a spectacle, because of just the whole tradition of the Big Ten thing and everything they like to do to blow it up, much like they do in SEC country. Is that something that you might want to see a little bit more of in this area, just to get people a little bit more sometimes into college football?
So the only way that it would work for a kickoff classic, because we talked about this and I remember kicking around the can on that conversation, is, I have no problem saying this, those games matter when both teams are good. When Alabama and Georgia played, again, granted that game was in Georgia, so that was a backyard game for much like it was when they played Auburn. But even Auburn was still respectable with Bo Nix. I believe Bo was still the quarterback. No, Bo was not the quarterback at that point.
No, that was.
Bo's been there for long.
That was Jarrett Stidham. As a Patriots fan, I have memories.
No, but my point being, at least Auburn was still a quality SEC opponent, right?
Right.
If you're Washington State, the only way you can make that case is you have to find your way into a Big Three conference by 28. And by the end of this home series, in 29 and 30 and 31, when the TV contracts get rewritten for certain conferences, you need to be in one of them, because otherwise, okay, let me tell you this: would Washington Boise State as a kickoff classic at Lumen Field excite many people? No. I mean, some, but no. You're certainly nowhere near what Lumen would need to be to make it worth it financially, right?
That's fair.
You don't want to having, as I said on the show a couple months ago, I covered that Wazoo Rutgers game. There wasn't nobody there. I mean, like, there was, don't get me wrong, but I'm saying from the perspective of what it was like in the Mercedes-Benz field down in Georgia, that was a full packed house crowd with Auburn fans to the gills, but a decent amount of UW fans, right? To not have that same level of energy and on-field likelihood for success makes it a harder sell as a kickoff game. You can still have the game as a non-conference, but to make it a true kickoff classic at Lumen and make all what it's supposed to be, you're more likely to have who's going to be left in. I'm trying to think of who's going to be left in the Big Ten. Or I guess, you know what? You could have Washington, Texas in the SEC in a kickoff classic in, Vegas, or maybe Lumen and start coming back to Washington and, does that whole spiel, because it's a Big Ten versus SEC matchup, not Big Ten versus Mountain West.
I see what you're saying.
And I say that with all due respect as a Washington State alum, but it's like the only way that matters is if you have two power conferences and two power programs going against each other.
I see what you're saying there. I definitely like that take a lot. Lars, as always, thank you so much for joining us here today. And thank you all the everydayers. Again, thank you so much for getting us over 1K. That really does mean a lot to us. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hey, we'd really appreciate it. If you like the show, you want to just keep up with us every day, there's so many easy ways to do that. You can subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts, whether it's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We are there. We are everywhere. Please feel to subscribe, like the video, leave us a 5-star review on audio only. It really does help the show a lot, so we'd really appreciate that. And just leave us a comment down on the YouTube. We'll try to get back to as many of you as we possibly can. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you on